and welcome to this brief tutorial on sharing an Ableton Live performance on Windows, including screen capture, voice commentary with ducking and muting, and video capture of controller usage. I'm going to put all the links to all the software and little pieces of equipment I use in the description of the video, and if you have comments or questions, feel free to ask. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. I've got Ableton open. I think this technique would work with other DAW software, but I'm going to focus on Ableton. So the first program you're going to need after Ableton is OBS Studio. So OBS Studio is a free piece of software, and you can use it for screen capture. In OBS, you're going to want to create a new scene and then add a display capture source and then start recording. You can start and stop recording and it will store the video in whatever directory you specify in the settings. Cool. So now you've got your screen capture. Next, you're going to need to route the audio from Ableton into the video. Now this is kind of the trickiest part of it all. Ableton can't really just route your audio device's stock driver. It needs to use this virtual mixer called VoiceMeeter, which is free. So in VoiceMeeter, I'm mixing hardware input from my headset mic and virtual input from VoiceMeeter. Now, where on earth does this virtual input come from? Well, if you go into Ableton and you hit Options and Preferences, then you can go to the driver type and select ASIO and the audio device and scroll down and select VoiceMeeter Virtual ASIO. Very cool. So let's stop the transport for a little bit. Okay, now once we've selected our virtual input and hardware input, we can map it to a hardware output. Notice that I have this fader which maps the actual output of my, I guess, monitoring this mixer. And I've got the virtual output, which is actually what's going to be fed into OBS. So I want to get this as close as possible to Unity without clipping, but I'm kind of leaving a little bit of headroom so I can get it to maybe around 3. I could compress it, but I don't really feel like doing that. So anyway, once I've got this, I want to route the audio into OBS. For that, I need to ignore desktop audio and then just go to Mic Aux, go into Properties, and then choose VoiceMeeter Output as my device, which maps the output of VoiceMeeter into the input of OBS's audio mixer. Great, so we've got voice capture and we've got screen capture, but we want to add a couple of things to make voice capture a little bit easier to integrate into an audio performance. And for that, I've got macro buttons set up for voice muting and voice ducking. In the first instance, I've used one button and I've called it voice, and it does the following things. It's a 2-position button, which means I don't need to hold it down. I can just hit it once and then hit it again and it goes back to its previous state. Now, oddly enough, mute equals 1 in this case triggers mute off. So whatever. I take the channel strip object at the 0th index, which happens to be the hardware input 1, and it is unmuted, and when I press the button, it mutes, and then when I press it again, it unmutes. This is pretty useful if you want to do manual muting, but it's not quite as cool as ducking automatically, which is great if you're playing and you want the virtual input from Ableton to be decreased in gain. So for that, I use another 2-position button. I've added a keyboard shortcut, but I'm not really using it. It's being triggered. The first action is that it will fade out to -20, and when it releases, it fades back to 0 over 500 milliseconds. So this first parameter is a dB value, and the second parameter is a value in milliseconds. So you can notice that when I stop talking, it will fade back up. And then when I start talking, it goes right back down. And what's doing this? Well, it's being triggered from a channel input. And this channel input is the channel strip input 1. And I've selected this threshold. It's going to change depending on whatever your microphone setup is. And I've had it so that once it goes below the out threshold, I guess the punch out threshold, it must hold for at least 1000 milliseconds or 1 full second before triggering the ducking. But this will get you going with ducking so that when you have a performance and you want to talk over it, it will just fade it out and you don't have to worry about stopping your transport. Great if you're doing stuff with loops. Cool, so I've got our macros set up in VoiceMeeter, and VoiceMeeter is routing Ableton, and it's capturing your voice and all the audio and the screen all in OBS Studio, but we want to add one more component. In that case, we want to add video capture of the push controller that I'm using. It could be any controller, really. So we go into our sources. We don't need to create a new scene. We just add another source, and that source is video capture device. We're going to click through that. Yes, the options are good, and cool. Now we've got a little thing that we can composite, and we can drag it to resize it. So I'm resizing it. I'm putting in a little corner over here, and now I've got all my stuff layered. And I'm doing this all while I'm recording too, so you can just kind of add it on the fly. It's pretty amazing. So that's it. We've got screen capture, voice capture with muting and ducking, and video capture of the Ableton Push. Enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to your questions and whatever you've got to share. Thanks.